Welcome to the Roots and Reflections podcast, a literary dialogue brought to you by the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Jamaica Member Bank. My name is Michaela White, Library Assistant at the ACIJ JMB, and these are my colleagues.
I'm Georgette Miller, Research Fellow at the ACIJ JMB.
And like Georgette, I am no stranger. I'm Trust Stevenson, Research Officer here at the ACIJ JMB.
Today we'll be having a discussion about emancipation and independence in Jamaica. As it is the period that we're in, it is fitting to speak about these books that highlight this specific topic. Today we'll be starting with a book that Ms. Stevenson will be presenting.
Okay, so we decided, since we're going to talk about this time period, how good it would be to select books from the ACIJ JMB reference library to aid in our discussion. So first, we're going to talk about enslavement, the enslavement period, and the book we chose is Orlando Patterson's The Sociology of Slavery. Orlando Patterson is a renowned sociologist. He was born in Jamaica, but currently he is a professor at Harvard University, and his area of study is not only sociology, but the sociology of slavery. Because, you know, a lot of people, when we think about slavery, we just think of it as a surface level that the enslaved, they just go out in the fields, they plant the sugar, they reap the sugar, they boil the sugar. But we don't think about the plantation society as a whole and how it affected persons mentally, physically, and socially. And you can say that the social aspect of enslavement is still being felt today, even though emancipation was hundreds of years ago. A few key points of Patterson's book: the enslaved person was not merely a laborer, but someone stripped of social identity, kinship, rights, and authority. Wouldn't you guys agree?
Yes. You alluded already to the point that slavery or enslavement, many times the regular person only thinks about the sufferation and the beatings, and we don't think about the relationships, the identity, how the enslaved would see themselves as a person and in relation to other enslaved persons around them.
And then another social aspect here that I see is the natal alienation. When you say natal alienation, it's like, what do you mean? So it's meant that the enslaved have no recognized family lineage or social belonging within the slave society. And this is a really good one, because us as descendants of enslaved, me particularly, because I loved reading Alex Haley's Roots. So I resonate with this one particularly, because when you see those of the East Indian society or British or Chinese, when they can trace their families back to generations. Yeah. But we descendants of the enslaved, all we have is 2 generations, maybe 3, depending. So this is another very poignant point of the book that really resonates even with us. This book was published, I think it was first published in I think this book was first published in 1969 and second printed in 1975. That was decades ago, but it still rings true even today.
Yeah, and that's why it's good. You have other books that we're not discussing today that when you talk about the identity of Jamaicans, we start with Africa, because of our history and our identity, and to think about the kinship, as you say. Books like these are important, and Orlando Patterson captured some of that in his plantation society, slavery society, in that book.
And then bringing in the plantation society, Michaela, the enslaved had no private life. All behavior, movement, and relationships were controlled by the planters and overseers. So that kind of brings him back now, the plantation as a total society.
Yeah,
enslaved
life. They
life.
see themselves as individuals, but as slaves.
They were a part of a system, and that system controlled how they ate, how they fed. Well, ate and fed is the same thing. Where they ate, where they slept,
where they went, who they could speak to, because it was limited.
It was very limited.
And how they could do any of those things.
And then, the system was built on surveillance, punishment, and isolation, making it deeply psychologically damaging. Because when the newly enslaved came in from the continent of Africa, from West Africa specifically,
Africa.
because Africa is not a monolith. And when they came in and they still had, you know, I would say illusions of freedom. No, maybe illusions
if they
is not the
maintained
right.
any of their identity, memory, sense of self, sense of being, we would call it, anything that reflected their place of origin, presented themselves.
But once they became kind of engrossed in the society, and of course, if they had resistance, it wasn't until much later during the enslavement time period, moving towards emancipation, that resistance kind of came up with more fervor, and they were more united in their resistance.
Well, let us not forget seasoning either. You know, so whether there was a display of resistance or rebellion or, you know, your own identity, seasoning was a part of the process. Once you are in the new world, you are going to be changed. So I'm not sure if it was Fanon or where I read it, but that the system of enslavement was made to erase any image, memory, context of the black person that came to the West.
And you're kind of no longer individual, you became a part of a group.
Homogeneous thing.
I think maybe that's why we often refer to Africa as Africa, because in our minds in the West, Africa is
one place.
Is one place. It's homogeneous, even though that's not the case. And then I think I brought up the fragility of the slave system. Constant resistance, whether through revolt, sabotage, or escape, meant that slavery was always under threat. And I think that's why the enslavers always kept such a tight rein.
Yes, because they didn't want them to think that they had control to be able to move away from slavery.
I don't know, you say a fragile system, and I'm thinking, who was really fragile? I mean, the colonizers could have thought to themselves that they outnumber us, the enslaved. But they had the machinery, they had the weaponry. They were the ones who were being punitive, they were the ones who were being abusive and committing this inhumane things. I don't know how they could have that thought about fragility.
No, because we outnumbered the enslaved, the enslaved population outnumbered them. That's why they kept such a tight control.
But it's who controlled the mind.
Oh, well, that's true.
And they use fear. They use fear
And
against our
lot
ancestors.
more than
That's
fear.
what they did.
And then, so another topic that he brings up here that really comes back to the ACIJ JMB is the Maroon societies. The Maroon societies were a really big part in resistance of enslavement. Even though they were outside of the plantations, they often sabotaged the enslaved,
as well as the spiritual resistance that was used.
And then they have the work slowdowns. Michaela mentioned the spiritual resistance. And spiritual resistance kind of brings in an aspect of fear, you know. Because the slave masters fear something that they don't understand.
Everybody fears something that they don't understand. But when you said the Maroons, the way that you mentioned the Maroons almost made it seem as if they were there before the enslaved got there. And that's not it. It's just that they escaped before they were on the plantation. But it brings to my mind the Tainos and whatever remnant of the Tainos that would have still been in Jamaica and be living in the mountains. Because, I mean, I don't know if we're allowed to discuss this if it's not in the book.
No, it kind of gives context.
It has its place.
Yeah, because in the way that you're saying that the Maroons would have helped in the resistance, and we are thinking it almost sounds a setup as if somebody was there to help those who ran off, escape, to kind of exist and get used to the place so they could help more who would have escaped.
So, kind of like wrapping up with Patterson's book now, he kind of talks about the cultural innovations laid the foundation for post-emancipation Jamaican society. So this will kind of segue into our next book on emancipation, because whilst the plantation was a totalitarian system, and they controlled everything that the enslaved did. The enslaved did have some sort of opportunities for subsistence, and we always talk about their subsistence gardening, their subsistence farming, where they would take to Sunday market, and this would help them to earn a living. And then during when emancipation came about now, and many of them many stayed on the plantations, but many moved away from the plantations. It was this subsistence and this sort of beginnings of their own kind of independence and self-reliance that they kind of learned from the plantation system, because by then no new enslaved had been brought into the island for like over 20 years. So these are few first, but definitely second and third generation that are being on the island now, and they have to relearn how to take care of themselves. Learn how to take care of themselves.
Learn because
they were doing it before.
Because at this point, I am saying memory is what is going to obtain. And if we didn't have any new slaves within the last 20 years, and the period of enslavement was approximately 400 years, you know, that would take some intuition, some
like
kind of intuitive learning, I would say. Otherwise, it is going to be what is in your environment, which is what the colonizers brought, and the ways of being that you've become accustomed to. Because if you're enslaved today and you're free tomorrow, I always say, what does that mean? That means I'm homeless, I am resourceless. All the monies that are being paid are given to the plantation owners. We now going to have to find a bush and pray that it can eat and grow a yam.
Eat and catch.
Right.
And the crops that they might have access to, they might have had access to on the plantation.
They won't have it anymore.
They won't have access to it anymore. So it's being introduced to new crops now, new growing methods.
And therefore you end up doing cheap labor, which is very close to enslavement.
All right. So there are lots of points made in Patterson's book, and if we continue, we'll never end. But it is a good read, particularly if you're a student of history, or if you're just a student, you want to edify yourself more. If you're doing CSEC history, this would be a good resource for your SPA if you're doing any SPA on the plantation society and the slavery system. So I encourage you to come to our library and seek out Orlando Patterson's The Sociology of Slavery next time you visit.
Okay. If you want to learn more about the ACIJ or the JMB, feel free to visit. We have a wide selection of books in our reference library, as well as our audiovisual collection. Follow our social media at ACIJ JMB on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Until then, stay rooted, stay reflective, and keep the conversation going.